Hey guys, welcome to my React segment. I'm Purist, and today we're gonna be touching on a period of history that I don't actually know the details about because we're gonna be reacting to how the papacy actually rose to power. Because there's a little bit of a gap in my knowledge. Because I know the Roman Empire was like basically taken over by Odoacer's empire. But I don't know how the Pope really fit into that and like how that happened. I just know that the Pope somehow was like there when like Charlemagne and like Martel was like doing his thing, like in like the 500 like the 700s. So I don't know how he comes into this. So it'll be interesting to find out. So yeah, sit back with some, snacks and, let's get this underway. Also, we always like the video. And also, we always copy the actual thing. So remember to put it in the actual video description, where it always lives. Anyway, let's go.
For millions of people, the Pope is the spiritual leader of their religion. Today, his secular domain only covers a few square kilometers in Rome, yet his voice still carries weight in international politics. But what does the history of this institution look like in its early days? How did this decisive bearer of the idea of Romanitas, of all things Roman, survive the turmoil of late antiquity and the power struggles in early medieval Italy to become one of the decisive players in the history of Europe?
On this, I actually didn't know this about this, but like when Mussolini was like rising to power in like the 20s and 30s, he actually had to take, well, quote unquote, take over the Pope. I kind of want to know what happened there as well. But like the only like aspect of like I know about that is that like vague hints placed by because I like play like a little bit of the Indiana Jones game, and that's it.
Today, we want to explore this complex history of the papacy between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages.
This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and React channels, and YouTube being permissive of AI slop.
Shh. I'm not here. I feel cold out right now. I mean the React content. Hi.
We don't do drama and we don't do AI, but thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history by pressing the join button under the video or the links in the description and pinned comment.
The story of the papacy's original rise to power begins in the era of late antiquity.
I mean, it obviously begins with Christianity, right?
When the Roman Empire still dominated the Mediterranean world. By 313, the Roman Empire started to become formally a Christian empire. Over the course of the 4th century, Christian dioceses emerged within the empire's borders.
The Edict of Thessaloniki from 380 made the Christian faith the original official religion of the Roman Empire. Yeah. I freaking love how it's just like basically just like a random whim that Constantine is just like, hey, I like this random ass religion, let's make it the national, like, empire-wide religion just because.
While Christian bishops increasingly became both the spiritual and political leaders of Roman cities. As the central
I wanna know like how like hard it was for like the average like Roman like living in those times to like actually like transition. That would be intriguing to find out.
authority of the emperor in the West declined throughout the 5th century, the bishops of the Roman Church increasingly took on sovereign and administrative tasks in their dioceses. During this time of transition, the Pope was first and foremost the bishop of the city of Rome, and did not necessarily hold supremacy over all other bishops as he does today. He was elected by its community, especially its urban nobility and clergy, with the
Yeah, it's really like he was like boss of like he was like the regional boss, wasn't he?
bishops of the surrounding dioceses attending the election. Like every bishop, the Bishop of Rome also had the task of spreading the faith and keeping it pure. Theologically significant at this point, however, is the exegesis of a passage in Matthew 16:18-19, in which Jesus Christ is said to have handed over the power of excommunication and absolution to the Apostle Peter. He, and the authority emanating from him, allows sins to be forgiven.
Oh! Wait, I didn't know that was like a thing. I mean, I knew that was a thing. I didn't know that was why St. Peter's was called that. I mean, not called that, but like... Let's just go on. I had a point to this, I swear. God damn it.
According to legend, Peter was martyred in Rome, making him the founder and first bishop of the Roman community in tradition. Throughout the 5th century, questions of faith were repeatedly referred to Rome, if only for the Bishop of Rome to act as a mediator between the parties. Rome quickly assumed a position of honor among the dioceses of Christendom, which did not entail any practical primacy, but strengthened the self-confidence of its bishops. The increasing Christianization of the Roman Empire, especially within the upper classes in the city of Rome itself, helped make the Roman bishop exceptional in a very worldly sense. Through donations and inheritances, he became the largest landowner in Italy. His possessions were soon bundled into so-called patrimonies and managed by lawyers and clerics following the model of the imperial administration.
Wait, so the whole thing about like the Pope owning the land, that came from this time? That came from the 300s. Yo. I didn't know it started that early. I thought that whole thing was like started like after the fall of the Roman Empire. Shit. I would have thought like the Romans would not necessarily have like granted that much like leeway between, you know, like an or something other than the actual state. I mean, maybe that's possibly why. Oh, I just remember what time it was. The whole crisis of the 3rd century. Yeah. that could also come into it a little bit, like the whole separation of church and state, maybe.
By the tenure of Pope Leo I, who reigned from 440 to 461, arguments were being made that, as St. Peter's successor and heir, the Bishop of Rome also had authority over other bishops and the Church in general. The Diocese of Rome, therefore, had precedence over other communities, and its bishop over other church leaders. Leo's intention to enforce this claim is evident in his condemnation of the Metropolitan Hugo of Arles, whom he reduced to the rights of a simple bishop. He also had his judgment confirmed by Emperor Valentinian III in secular terms. Last but not least, Leo, represented by envoys, was also one of the most important players at the Council of Chalcedon, where important decisions on the faith were made. So it was that Rome, as the ancient center of the empire, was to become the religious caput orbis, the head of the world.
Huh. Okay. That is very interesting. At the Council of Serdica, for example, was stipulated that in religious disputes one should look to the Bishop of Rome as mediator. So... is it actually proven that there was actually a pope at this time, or was it just the Bishop of Rome? Because I'm still having like a little bit of hard time finding that out.
However, this claim by the Roman bishops to occupy a higher position than the other bishops was slow to gain acceptance, and remained controversial for centuries. Nevertheless, shortly before the end of the Western Roman Empire, the bishops of Rome already held a prominent position in the state religion.
Here we go. Here's the... What? That was random? Huh. Sorry. If that... Might have to look into that. It's never happened before. Hang on. Alright. Anyway, on with the video.
Religious apparatus of the empire. The end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 did not spell the end for Pope Simplicius, who was ruling bishop in Rome at the time. Even though the Visigothic patricius Odoacer proclaimed himself Rex Italiae, King of Italy, life initially continued as it was. The empire had been unstable for decades, its armies in the west were weak, and armed gangs roamed Italy.
Yeah.
In 410 and 455, first the Vandals and then the Visigoths had sacked the Eternal City.
Pope Simplicius made himself particularly popular with the Romans through his efforts against such armed groups.
So what difference did it make if another Roman military leader deposed the emperor in the west? From Ravenna, the essential structures of the late Roman Empire remained intact, and Odoacer was recognized by the Eastern Roman Emperor as regent under his nominal supremacy.
Huh. I did know that, like, Odoacer kind of like just used the established infrastructure that Rome had already built. He didn't really destroy it or like usurp it.
The new ruler was also able to come to terms with the Roman nobility. Although the papacy continued to subtly assert its authority over other bishops after the fall of the last Western emperor, it was still far from holding a hegemonic position, or even a leadership position, in the former Western Empire. This was clearly illustrated by the dispute over the election of Pope Anastasius II's successor in late 498. Two candidates were elected, Symmachus and Laurentius. Symmachus was elected by the clergy, and Laurentius by the nobility and people of Rome. A decision had to be made, and both parties turned to Theodoric the Great, who had deposed Odoacer as ruler of Italy in 493 and
The question of whether Theodoric ruled as an independent ruler or in a form of subordination to the Eastern Roman Empire is the subject of ongoing debate.
founded the so-called Ostrogothic Empire. Both parties now tried to win over the new ruler to their cause with words and gifts. There was more than just a personnel issue at stake. While Laurentius took a conciliatory line towards the Eastern Roman Empire in a theological dispute over monophysitism, Symmachus was uncompromising and wanted to maintain the schism as long as the East did not yield. Consequently, the question of Rome's ties and position to Constantinople was also at stake. In 499, Theodoric decided to support Symmachus, thereby angering the Eastern Roman Empire. The conflict between the parties dragged on until 506, with supporters of both sides engaging in full-scale street battles until Theodoric put his foot down and closed the matter. It is important to note that not only was Theodoric a so-called barbarian Goth, but he was an Arian Christian, a brand of Christianity considered heretical to the Roman Church. This dispute shows that it was hardly a problem to turn to a foreign and, moreover, heretical mediator to resolve the internal church problems of Rome. It was therefore natural for Theodoric to send Pope John I to Byzantium in 523 as a negotiator to intercede on behalf of the Goths who were being persecuted there. However, with the death of Theodoric the Great in 526, Rome and the Pope once again came under the direct rule of the empire. During the western reconquests of the Eastern Roman Empire, the armies of Emperor Justinian I brought North Africa, enclaves in Hispania, and the Italian peninsula back under the direct control of Constantinople.
Yeah, Justinian was like the tried reconquest of the Western Roman Empire was. Yeah, it was close. I didn't realize how close. For a while, actually. For a little while, until relatively recently. So. Yeah, I think Justinian kind of. He was either murdered or he fell in battle, I want to say. I can't remember what stopped his conquests.
This changed the power structure to which the Roman bishop was subject. Numerous Romans left the city in the course of the fighting, which shrank noticeably in size once again. The intellectual elite, in particular, migrated to the east, their high theological disputations giving way to spiritual accounts by miracle storytellers.
Yeah. I do know this, like, you know, when the Ostrogoths were, declining, and, like, the Eastern Roman Empire was, like, kind of dominating. There was, like, kind of like an exodus of, like, learned people to the east, which is, in effect, that's kind of what, Constantine was, well, not hoping for, but, yeah, not hoping for, but, like, marking on what we needed doing.
The city's squares gave way to the cattle of farmers. Italy was reintegrated into the empire, and with the imperial troops came an administration and tax system oriented towards Constantinople. As Bishop of Rome, the Pope was once again a subject of the Roman Emperor during this period. After being elected Pope, the candidate and the election proceedings had to be reported to the Emperor together with the Credo, the candidate's profession of faith. After examination, the Emperor confirmed the election, and only then could the consecration take place.
In the 7th century onwards, the election was confirmed by the Exarch of Ravenna and forwarded to Constantinople, a concession by the Emperor to Rome.
Due to this procedure, in some cases years passed between the election and the consecration of a pope. With Justinian's reconquest of Rome, the Roman law he codified also came to Italy. Here, the Pope had his own role to play. On the one hand, according to this law, the Pope's role as the first of the priests of ancient Rome was limited to the West. On the other hand, the same laws described the secular duties that bishops were allowed to assume in Italy. For example, they were allowed to have a say in the appointment of civil servants. These laws laid the foundations for the further establishment of the papacy's rule and emancipation from secular rulers. Even so, Italy remained a coveted place. From 568 onwards, the Lombards invaded the peninsula. They were initially able to wrest Friuli and the northwest of the peninsula from the Eastern Empire. The Lombards settled mainly in the Po Valley and established a kingdom with Pavia as its capital. By the middle of the 7th century, they had succeeded in extending their dominion to the center of Italy. Various Lombard principalities, known as duchies, emerged here. Trento, Friuli, Spoleto, Tuscany, and Benevento surrounded Rome and the papal possessions. Byzantine possessions remained in the form of the Exarchate of Ravenna and the Pentapolis, the duchies of Rome and Naples.
The Ducate of Rome was gradually brought under direct rule of the Pope as imperial governor. He was therefore a local representative in contrast to the exarchs who often came from outside the region and administered the other Byzantine territories. So, I mean, we're gonna let this play, but does this mean that the Pope technically was an imperial governor and that the Vatican City is... I'm gonna let this play. I want to make sure.
As well as in southern Italy and Sicily. The popes now found themselves caught between the Lombards, Byzantium, and their own interests in the city of Rome, and had to carefully balance these. In the process, Rome increasingly became a border town on the edge of the Eastern Roman sphere of influence, and had to act more and more independently. The increasingly separated nature of the relationship between Rome and Constantinople is illustrated by the dispute between Emperor Constans II and Pope Martin I in 648. The point of contention was the question of the will and nature of Christ, on which the emperor had issued a decree that deviated from the dogmatic faith and therefore caused a stir in the West. Martin I convened a synod in the Lateran in 649, and not only condemned the religious movement in the East, but also excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople and other priests in the East. Since these decisions were explicitly directed against the emperor's religious policy, Constans wanted to have the Pope arrested for high treason. The Exarch Olympios moved his troops to Rome in accordance with the emperor's wishes, only to proclaim himself emperor in the West. Martin I did nothing to counter this and waited for the situation to blow over. After Olympios fell in battle against Muslim forces in 652, his successor returned to Rome, ravaged and plundered the Lateran palace, imprisoned the Pope, and took him to Constantinople to stand trial. Martin was convicted and exiled, and used as a scapegoat for the imperial officers who had partaken in Olympius's rebellion. Under imperial pressure, a new pope was elected in Rome, a vivid example of the problems faced by both parties. Resistance to the emperor and emancipation of Rome was possible if the empire did not have control over its own power structures. Maintaining this control became increasingly problematic for Constantinople. The volatile relationship between the Pope and the Basileus repeatedly led to similar escalations, in which theological and imperial claims collided. Over the course of the rest of the 7th and the beginning of the 8th century, the rift between Rome and Constantinople continued to widen, despite having phases of good relations. Once again, theological and secular reasons intertwined in the 3rd of the 8th century.
Oh yeah, he's about to go into like the iconoclasm or whatever. That the Byzantines kind of like did so, and thus like kind of like got rid of like most of early Christian symbolism from up to that point. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, I probably could have like thought about that. Yeah, the main source of discomfort would obviously be the Great Schism, of course. Like, I don't know why that like literally slipped my mind, but jeez. Yeah.
The iconoclastic controversy
Yeah.
saw Constantinople side
Yeah.
with the iconoclasts, while Rome continued to tolerate images of God, Mary, and the saints. At the same time, the Eastern Roman Empire attempted to impose higher taxes on papal landholding.
For Rome, images of God and the saints were also important as didactic tools in the context of missionary work. Yeah. As they could be used to introduce the Christian faith and its ideas to newly Christianized or yet to be Christianized groups north of the Alps. Yeah. You can't really, like, extol, like, the beautifications of God without, representations of said God and associated imagery. Kind of hard. It's like, there is a God that loves you all. How do we know? Just trust me, okay?
In order to finance the ongoing struggle against the Muslims. Pope Gregory II and his successor and namesake Gregory III refused to comply with the tax increases and condemned Emperor Leo III in the iconoclastic controversy.
It's always taxes, isn't it? It's always freaking taxes.
In response,
Next thing you know, they're gonna be throwing, foodstuffs in the Tyrrhenian Sea.
to this, the emperor withdrew the southern Italian and Sicilian provinces from the vicarial control of the Pope and directly made them subordinate to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The Pope's generous possessions located there were confiscated, causing Rome to lose important sources of income. The practical sphere of influence of the Patrimonium Party was therefore limited to central Italy and some areas along the Exarchate on the Adriatic coast, and even these areas were threatened by the Lombards, who were becoming increasingly aggressive towards the Pope and also Byzantium. The Lombard king Liutprand I ensured strong internal stability in his kingdom and employed many Romans at his court. At the same time, he succeeded in bringing the independent Lombard duchies into line with his own interests by means of conquest and treaties. King Aistulf then succeeded in conquering Ravenna in 751, thereby destroying the Byzantine Exarchate. Now the strengthened Lombard Empire made preparations to extend its supremacy over Rome and the papal possessions. Byzantium, as the imperial protector of the Pope, had slowly but steadily lost control of the regained territories soon after the death of Justinian I. Battles against the Persians, then against Slavic and nomadic groups in the Balkans, as well as the ever-advancing Muslim forces, tied up most of the empire's armies, so that by the middle of the 8th century, Italy and the Bishop of Rome ended up far down on the list of priorities. No Byzantine dukes had been appointed in Rome since the beginning of the 8th century, so all worldly power here finally passed to the Pope and the Roman nobility. The Pope was now the lord of the Duchy of Rome, its army, and its administration. This development ultimately led to a final break with the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire and led the way to an heir to the empire in the West. With Constantinople's power over Italy in decline and the Lombards expanding their territory, Rome and the Pope needed a new protector after 751. Popes Gregory I
And this is where the Frankish Empire came in. To try and they tried to try and secure their own independence. And like where he hold, and that's so like the entire existence of the HRE is due to an independence play for the the early pope to hold on to his lands, his remnant of the Exarchate of Rome from the Byzantines. I mean, I may be wrong, let's play, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
III had already taken a favourable stance towards the Franks and their ruling family of the Merovingians, as well as their mayor of the palace, Charles Martel. After all, they had promoted the Christian mission, increasingly aligned Christian rites north of the Alps with the Roman model, and
Yeah, I mean, I have only a vague interpretation of the what happened with the Merovingian, like that conflict. That, from what I've read, it's messy as hell. Like absolutely messy as hell. Like, I mean, some, aspects of like, nobility are messy as hell. The Merovingians were messier than that. That was nut bowl of like nuttiness.
and, last but not least, were successful in the fight against the advancing Muslim forces. Thus, when the Lombard king Aistulf began to exert pressure on the Pope in Rome to place his possessions and rule over Rome itself under Lombard control, Pope Stephen II first turned to the Eastern Emperor Constantine V. His call for help went unheard from across the Bosphorus, whereupon Stephen himself turned to the Frankish king Pippin III. Pippin had only been elevated to king in 751.
So, okay, the Pope spread out, reached out to the Eastern Roman Empire first, but heard no answer, and so the second was for the Frankish Empire. Okay.
After asking Pope Zacharias whether it was good that the kings of the Franks from the Merovingian dynasty had no power, the Pope replied that it was better to designate as king the one who had power. Consequently, the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, was deposed with the Pope's consent, and Pippin III of the Carolingian dynasty ascended the throne. Pope Stephen II himself travelled to the Franks and met with this new king in Pantheon in 754. Here, the Pope showed himself humble towards the Frankish ruler, fell down before him, and asked for the help of Pippin and the Franks against the Lombards who were threatening the Holy See. After lengthy negotiations, Pippin agreed to fight for the Pope and Rome. He promised to protect the Pope's possessions and added to them lands from the Lombards and Byzantines that were yet to be conquered. Petri, which still exists today as the Papal States, was thus established by Pippin's donation. The Frankish
Okay. So this is the actual establishment of the Papal States. 753 CE. Alright.
king and his descendants received the title Patricius Romanorum for this. In addition, Pippin and his descendants, Carloman and Charles, were anointed by Pope Stephen, further cementing the legitimacy of their still young reign. With these new titles and the new consecration, the Carolingians began to present themselves more and more in close coordination with the Pope, as a continuation of Roman authority and as the elevated protectors of Christianity. In 755 and 756, the Franks waged war against the Lombards, who were forced to surrender both times under the blows of the Franks. The Pope in Rome had found a new protector, and ancient Rome was now to come to terms with this new heir to the Roman Empire from the West. The history of the papacy is one of the longest continuous historical narratives in Euro-Mediterranean history. We've only been able to trace the fundamental developments of this institution from the end of antiquity to the early Middle Ages in excerpts. The most important aspects were probably the continuity of Roman rule and tradition, the slowly developing supremacy of the Roman bishop in the post-Roman world, and the constant connection with secular rulers. In doing so, the popes of the early Middle Ages had to deal cautiously but firmly with the secular rulers in Constantinople, Milan, Pavia, and finally north of the Alps in matters of theology and power politics. In all of this, there is a line of development that leads to the independence of the Pope's rule over Rome and finds its first conclusion in the connection with the Franks and the simultaneous separation from Byzantium. We'll tell you about the history of the Pope's relationship with the Franks and the baptism of a new empire in the West in another video. So make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. We release weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or the button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.
All right. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed that. Aside from the random technical, like, hiccups that I've never seen before, like, I really have to look into that. I hope that didn't, mar your experience. Anyway. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. I've been Purist, signing off.